Did he give you, like, a goal? You know, before we put him into different pieces, he was, like, trying to build up this god called Vecna. You don't know anything about, like, a god called Vecna, do you?
Or this entity called Vecna.
Are you Vecna? Vecna's children? Are you one of his priests?
Vecna.
Oh, really?
Vecna.
Oh, it's Vecna?
What's
Vecna
rare?
would get it, right?
Vecna would, who would get the, yeah, would be
Can't
that.
let that happen.
The Vecna orb. I'm also gonna assume that it's not gonna jump into the crazy Vecna circle.
Vecna's.
Vecna and
With Vecna?
Okay.
The Vecna, right?
Vecna.
That's your
Vecna's
normal
also
one,
back to fall.
Vecna?
Vecna.
Vecna served as the archvillain in Final Encounter Vox Machina, in Critical Role's rousing first campaign. While much of the essence of Vecna remains familiar, Matt Mercer has given the Master Lich his own personal twist to better fit his world. So sit back and enjoy, from mysterious origins to a recounting of his devastating defeat. Welcome to the story of Vecna in Exandria. Long ago, in an age before the Calamity, the Age of Arcanum, a prodigal archmage rose to the fore, utilizing his talent for necromancy and pushing the arcane beyond what was previously known. This necromancer was known as Vecna and was a force of insurmountable intellect among mortals, and his creative bending of known arcane theory enabled many of the powerful artifacts of war that stoked the flames of the Calamity. However, much of Vecna's contributions to magical theory were overlooked, which must have spurned the talented mage. Around this era, another powerful mortal found the secret to apotheosis and became known as the Raven Queen. This ritual, called the Ritual of Seeding, was considered the greatest achievement in the arcane petri dish that was the Age of Arcanum. Vecna, of course, pursued the Ritual of Seeding, naturally feeling the greatest achievement of the age should be his. Galvanized, Vecna pursued mighty magics and forbidden knowledge, resorting to violence to assure that his knowledge was his alone. Vecna pursued lichdom while amassing followers and undead forces. Once a lich and a powerful warlord, Vecna entered the Shadowfell, where he conquered the city of Thar-Amphala, and erected a dark tower called Entropis that would serve as his domain. At Entropis, Vecna would discover a use for the magical ley lines that ran across Exandria. Under certain conditions, these ley lines would converge and the barrier between planes would weaken. This phenomenon is known as the Celestial Solstice. Vecna would learn to leverage the solstice to make precision strikes on targets across Exandria from his tower in the Shadowfell. Vecnan forces would suddenly pour through a portal and enforce Vecna's will on his enemies. With every passing battle and every strong man cowed, Vecna would grow stronger by raising his shattered enemies as undead serfs. Amongst Vecna's greatest enemies in the age was Kos, who, after being defeated by Vecna's precision ambushes through the solstice, accepted a deal to serve Vecna. In exchange, Kos was gifted the blood kiss of vampirism. Under Vecna, Kos became known as the Bloody-Handed, evidence of his brutality towards his master's enemies. Kos grew to become the right hand of Vecna, and the Archlich forged for Kos a powerful sword. The black longsword was infused with Vecna's consciousness and became sentient, whispering in Kos's ears. The blade would be known simply as the Sword of Kos. This whispering likely influenced Kos and his eventual betrayal of Vecna, a downfall that originated in Vecna's greatest strength becoming his greatest liability, the Celestial Solstice. The forces of Exandria were able to reverse engineer the solstice to strike Vecna at Entropis. A champion of Pelor, Yasvarda, led an army through the solstice portal and onto the doorstep of Entropis, laying siege to the Black Tower. The timing of this assault was fortuitous, for at this point, Vecna was on the cusp of completing the rite of seeding to ascend to godhood. Yas, empowered by Pelor, faced down Vecna himself, and an epic battle ensued at the top of Entropis. Unfortunately for Exandria, Vecna would strike Yas down, and as the champion passed into the fields of Pelor and the hope of the people of Exandria waned, Kos, the loyal hound of Vecna, turned his bite against his master. Seeing the exhausted Vecna, and at the insistence of his sword, Kos struck at the Archlich, and a second combat ensued at the top of Entropis. This one, however, would see both Vecna and Kos destroyed. The only thing left in the aftermath was the hand and eye of Vecna and the sword of Kos. With Vecna destroyed, the forces of the Lord of the Rotted Tower disintegrated, and Exandria was saved. Pieces of Vecna's following scattered to the corners of the world and maintained their reverence for the Archlich in secret. This cult would become known as the Remnants, and their worship would be enough to cause the echoes of Vecna to ascend to that of a minor deity. Thus, Vecna refused to pass into the long night. In the ensuing centuries, the remnants worked in the shadows to spread their influence and undermine the peoples of Exandria, ever pursuing their master's goal of rebirth and apotheosis. This brings us to two of Vecna's most notorious followers.
I hope it wasn't too much trouble, Silas.
Delilah, my dear, it was nothing.
The Briarwoods hailed from Wildmount, where Delilah was an accomplished but ignoble wizard that had been through many different schools and even trained at the Alabaster Lyceum in Amon. Delilah even as far as held the position of Archmage of Antiquity, a position in the Cerberus Assembly of the Dwendalian Empire. The prodigious rise of Delilah is proof of her power and talent, but she came upon a problem even she had no answer for. Silas had become gravely ill, and as he slipped from this life, Delilah desperately reached out for help, and no voice returned, save a solemn whisper. The whispers directed Delilah Briarwood to a forbidden rite that could save Silas. In her desperation, Delilah hastily performed the rite, saving Silas, but turning him into a creature of the night, a vampire. A powerful archmage and a pure vampire, Delilah and Silas had now become one of Vecna's greatest assets.
Trust in the Whispered One, for we are his blood.
What did you do, my dear?
Soon the Briarwoods would set their sights on the city of Whitestone and its noble ruling family, the de Rolos. The de Rolos were ripe for exploitation, as they had cut themselves off from the rest of the political world. And so, the Briarwoods ingratiated themselves with the de Rolos, and made an alliance with individuals that worked in the castle of Whitestone. When the moment was right, the Briarwoods launched a plan that would see the usurpation of the de Rolo family and their slaughter. During a feast in their honor, the Briarwoods took control of the castle and murdered anyone loyal to the de Rolos, including the family themselves. However, two of the children, Percival and Cassandra, were spared and imprisoned. Unfortunately for the Briarwoods, the young Percival did escape their clutches. The Briarwoods locked Whitestone down with an iron grip, cutting the city from the outside world. It would be discovered later that Whitestone was built over a sunken temple of Ioun. In service to Vecna, the Briarwoods excavated the temple, commonly known simply as the Ziggurat. Some years later, as the Briarwoods were creating ties with the monarch of Tal'Dorei, they had once again crossed paths with Percival de Rolo. Except now, the young Percival had grown into a powerful member of Vox Machina, a notorious group of adventurers containing Grog Strongjaw the Barbarian, Keyleth the Arashari Druid, Pike Trickfoot the Cleric of Sarenrae, Scanlan Shorthalt the Bard, Vex the Ranger, and Vax the Rogue. Upon their meeting the Briarwoods, Vox Machina turned their sights upon them and pursued them back to Whitestone, where they discovered a necrotic dystopia. Vox Machina turned to ground and launched a guerrilla campaign against the pillars of the Briarwoods' hold on Whitestone, weakening their grasp and planting the seed of rebellion in the remaining citizens. This eventually did culminate in a showdown between the legendary heroes and the Dread couple at the unearthed Ziggurat beneath Whitestone, where the Briarwoods took the initiative in the confrontation, but even acid traps and vampiric charm could not prevent Vox Machina from prevailing and cutting down Silas and Delilah and reclaiming Whitestone and the name of the deposed de Rolos. But not before Delilah hastily completed a Vecnan ritual that summoned a mysterious magical orb of anti-magic. This orb would eventually be concluded to be a magical energy siphon feeding the ritual atop the tower of Entropis. With two of Vecna's most useful pawns slain, his plans in Whitestone thwarted, Vecna looked elsewhere. Luckily for the endeavoring demigod, Vox Machina would be for now distracted fighting the mighty dragons of the Chroma Conclave, and his cultists continued to advance his will. Much time later, Vox Machina would learn another Ziggurat was unearthed in Marquette by Vecna's cult, with a similar magical siphon atop it. Vox Machina would investigate the Ziggurat, aiming to quash the cult. It would be here that Vox Machina would face down a resurrected Delilah Briarwood, who this time would escape through the orb and revealed that it could function as a portal to the Shadowfell. Vox Machina pursued Delilah to the Dark Plane and found themselves in the city of Thar Amphala, Vecna's old capital. There, Delilah would successfully resurrect her liege lord atop Entropis, and the city of Thar Amphala would be transported to Exandria. After so many years, the Undying King returned to Exandria, with his sights set on apotheosis and subjugation. Standing against him are the heroes of Vox Machina, who scaled Entropis to face down the demigod. In addition to Vecna, Vox Machina faced down a loyal Death Knight and Delilah Briarwood. The heroes surround their enemies. Alas, Vecna seizes the initiative by casting a powerful Hold Person spell, paralyzing most of the party, as his loyal Death Knight and Delilah Briarwood enter combat and make hard blows against Vox Machina, and Vox Machina responds with their own attacks. While Vecna rebukes in kind, casting a successful power word kill on Vax that abruptly ends her life. With Vax felled, Vox Machina attempts to take control of the situation, but the effort is wasted as Grog is banished to the Shadowfell by the Death Knight, and Vecna launches a disintegrate at Vax, turning him into dust. Percy takes a revenge shot at Delilah, killing her instantly, while the rest of the team assess a losing proposition and work to retreat. Pike revivifies Vax, and the Death Knight's concentration is broken for Grog to return. Vox Machina then gather around Keyleth, who casts Plane Shift, teleporting them to the Feywild. Vox Machina sans Vax escape the Whispered One's clutches, for now. With no one else to oppose him, Vecna promptly completed the rite of ascension. There would now be a second mortal to ascend to greater godhood, and with each passing moment, divine power amassed within the Whispered One. Vecna now set his sights on the rulership of Exandria. Vecna sought a steed fit for a god, and revived an Earth Titan to carry his great city, and began marching with Thar Amphala towards Vasselheim. Vecna laid siege to the city, and it was soon brought to his attention that Vox Machina had again infiltrated Thar Amphala, and were seeking a final confrontation with him. Vox Machina and Vecna begin combat atop a shattered Entropis. Unbeknownst to Vecna, however, this time Vox Machina had a few aces up their sleeve. In the aftermath of their failed confrontation with Vecna, Vox Machina regroups in the Feywild. The chosen of the Raven Queen Vax, who's felled in the fight, communicates with the Raven Queen in Limbo, and makes a deal to be returned to life for the sole purpose of destroying Vecna, before returning to the Raven Queen in death. Vax accepts, and the legend of Vox Machina is whole again, with its rogue now a revenant of the Raven Queen. Reunited, Vox Machina decides to pursue divine help in their fight against Vecna. Vox Machina entered the fields of Elysium and communed with the goddess of redemption, the Everlight, Sarenrae. She reveals that the ritual of seeding was cast from all knowledge and sealed, intent for eternity, by all who walk the paths of divinity. None should know this. And thus the concern of the power of Vecna is felt by Sarenrae, and she directs them to Pelor to seek more information on the ritual of seeding and finding Ioun. After a trial from Pelor, Vox Machina learns of the previous banishment of the Chained Oblivion. Pelor shares that Ioun designed the Prime Trammels, items infused with divine power that, when struck into a wounded god, could seal them away beyond the Divine Gate that separates powerful gods from directly entering Exandria. Pelor awards Vexalia with a bead of his own divinity for the forging of such an item, before sharing the last known position of Ioun, or rather, the possible location of a person that is key to finding Ioun. In the Cliffkeep Mountains, an individual known as Sprig the Obnoxious embodied the frequency to attune a planeshift spell to Ioun's location. Vox Machina locates this individual, holds off a Vecna ambush, and shifts to Ioun's domain. Once there, Scanlan proves himself in Ioun's challenge, and receives her blessing. Ioun then shares the process of crafting her Prime Trammel and the rites of Prime Banishment that go along with them. Ioun then bestows upon the group the ability to craft the Trammels, along with a bead of her own divinity. With their newfound knowledge, Vox Machina descended into the heart of an undersea volcano, and into a forge with might enough to create the Prime Trammels, the core anvil of the Allhammer. With the blessing and knowledge of Ioun, Vox Machina forges 3 Prime Trammels, one with the bead of the divinity of Raven Queen, one with the bead of divinity of Pelor, and another with the divinity of Ioun. Prime Trammels in hand, Vox Machina infiltrated Thar Amphala, in search for another item that may turn the tides in their favor, the Sword of Kos. After dealing with some of Vecna's attack dogs and traps, including tricks and hostages of the hero's loved ones, Vox Machina located and retrieved the sword from the bowels of Thar Amphala, and ascended the tower.
Heading up the stairs. The greenish light of the surface greets you as you break towards the top of the tower. This ascent is somewhat familiar to Keyleth, having seen this exact arrival once before as you were originally scrying on the Death Knight. As soon as you hit the peak, the wind sends your hair behind you and scattering across your face, as you can see the extremely strong cyclone that encapsulates the top of this tower is now swirling around you. There are occasional breaks in the clouds where you see glimpses of the sprawling city of Vasselheim right below you. You see the Titan's feet have already breached the outer walls and have begun crushing their way through the braving grounds of the city. Columns of smoke swirl upward to engulf the behemoth's legs with each impact, and you get the sense the entire city is leaning forward as it's begun to assault what looks to be thousands upon thousands of soldiers that have swarmed up towards the base of the creature. You can see arrow and spell being flung from a distance. You can see other flying soldiers, wyvern riders, eagle riders across the way that are crashing into Gloomstalker clouds that are swooping down to engulf the skies above the city as the 4 giant arms of this titan continue to pummel and smash, tossing large towers and temples, just breaking into bits of rubble and rock. You can see now hundreds of warriors man siege weapons against this unstoppable ancient threat as giant rocks and boulders go flying past, slamming the sides of the giant dome that still remain holding. However, there you can see the large wedge that you had already left free and open, where the soldiers that managed to break through the initial onslaught of the Gloomstalkers are beginning to swarm in and try and make their way in your direction. Bolts of green energy crackle and fork through the swirling clouds around you, and your eyes creep upward to lock onto the terrifying avatar form of Vecna the Ascended, the undying king-made god. His now huge skeletal lich body, floating about 40 feet above the tower, staring down at you. Tendrils of screaming souls entwine within his limbs and the tome he has clutched in his right hand. Stretching, and with every gesture, you see the faces screech and cry in pain as they're withered and torn as his arms shift downward to greet you. The gaping left socket is almost blinding with crackling power, arcs of arcane tethers crawling across his chest and face. His left hand, however, is whole, seemingly recovered a part of his previous power. The hand of Vecna appears to have been reattached. The artifact now pulses with the same green energy that sparks from his voided socket. Across his long, tattered red robes and his dark golden armor, his ribcage glows from within, sending beams of sickly green light out at each gap. And there, floating within the bones, is the faint outline of a small humanoid form locked within.
The humanoid form trapped in Vecna's ribs is an elven child named Valora, and the half-sister of Vexalia and Voxeldon. Yet another hostage of the Vox Machina need rescue. And now, Vox Machina and Vecna face down in an ultimate encounter. If Vecna is victorious, the world of Critical Role becomes one under the thumb of Vecna, as his ascension to full god will be completed and Vasselheim destroyed. The Undying King will be the only god on this side of the Divine Gate, and free to do as he pleases with Exandria. Vecna taunts the legendary heroes before launching a meteor swarm that sunders what remains of Vecna's tower, throwing Scanlan the Bard clinging to the edge of the rubble above a deep fall. Grog Strongjaw responds with multiple attacks from the Sword of Kaz. The appearance of the sword appears to fill Vecna with a moment of apprehension, and Vecna seeks to solve this by casting Maze and sending the furious barbarian to a labyrinth on a demi-plane. Vox Machina immediately focuses on attempting to break Vecna's concentration. Vex and Vax attack with a volley of projectiles but fail to break concentration. Vecna raises skeletal minions, and Scanlan 2, a simulacrum of Scanlan the Bard, joins the fray. Scanlan 2 uses Bigby's hand to strike Vecna, with no effect, revealing to the heroes that they must attack with a powerful enough spell to affect him. Vecna attempts to dispel the simulacrum, but is counterspelled, an action from Ioun's champion that will become quite the cornerstone of Vox Machina's potential victory. Keyleth follows up with a sunburst for a large amount of radiant damage, and yet Vecna retains his concentration. Unfortunately, with the strike, the trapped Valora is killed and falls. Percy launches his own volley at Vecna's minions, while Scanlan prevents his falling by dimension dooring to Vecna's large ribcage, and Pike offers some relief with divine healing. Vecna, recognizing the threat of the druid Keyleth, who was responsible for Vox Machina's previous hot exits, takes aim at her and attempts to cast Feeble Mind. However, Scanlan successfully counterspells and, upon a second casting, assists Keyleth to resist with inspiration. The skeletal minions swarm Keyleth as a great roar thunders through the clouds as a shining brass dragon emerges.
And you watch as two Gloomstalkers come swarming outward, wounded. One of them slaps into the side of one of the islands and collapses. The second one suddenly gets snatched in the jaws of what now you see a sparkling brass dragon emerge from the side.
Really?
As Jamon Sa'ord flies in, glances right up in the form of Devosa towards Vecna and shouts out in a deep, bellowing dragon voice.
Your time is done, old one. Fall before us all.
And unleashes.
With that, Jamon reminds Vox Machina of the wider battle at play, with the entirety of the forces of Vasselheim and the allyship against Vecna's forces. Vecna dispels Scanlan's simulacrum, and Vox Machina renews their assault. Keyleth shape changes into a mighty planetar, giving her a much-needed boost to her health and ability to heal others. Close by, Percival de Rola launched a well-placed volley at Vecna, which does considerable damage, which causes Vecna's concentration to finally drop and return Grog to the field. Scanlan seizes the initiative on Grog's return and polymorphs into a giant eagle, picking up Grog and ascending towards Vecna to deliver the barbarian's fury. Pike assists their attack by casting Guiding Bolt and hitting a critical attack for a large amount of radiant damage. Noticing their approach, Vecna ends Scanlan's polymorph with a firebolt, and the barbarian and the bard fall. Vecna, clutching a wound, makes clear this battle has spiraled further than he is comfortable, and manifests his wrath, raising his left hand to the sky to summon another meteor swarm. Scanlan the bard suffers the most, going unconscious and slamming the ground. The light fades from his eyes before a rush of breath fills Scanlan's lungs with life once again. A previous application of Death Ward revives him to 1 HP. Continuing his assault, Vecna traps Jamon the Brass Dragon in a force cage, seemingly removing Jamon from the field. Attempting to double down, Vecna puts Scanlan into a death whiplash by leveling another firebolt at him and returning him to unconsciousness, before Vax intervenes with a Lay on Hands field healing and takes the attack back to Vecna, striking him with a smite. Vecna responds with a powerful Circle of Death. Jamon rages against the force cage containing her massive form as 2 of Vox Machina's allies arrive by Wyvern, Zara, and Kasha, providing a solid attack against Vecna and healing for the heroes. Pike continues the healing with a mass heal. Meanwhile, Keyleth, in planetar form, launches Grog, who throws the Sword of Kos and buries it into Vecna, while Scanlan adds on a casting of Fireball. Vecna responds in kind by casting Hold Monster and Zara, Kasha, and their 2 wyverns, who fall out of sight and out of the battle. Vecna rises again and launches a 3rd meteor swarm, an unprecedented amount of power on display. No members of Vox Machina were knocked unconscious this time, in no small part to the divine healing from Pike and Kasha. Before the dust from the swarm settles, Vax renews his assault and closes the distance with Vecna once more to fulfill his matron's oath. Vecna assesses his foes and determines Scanlan is the one closest to death. Vecna strikes the bard with another fireball and summons 5 skeletal minions to aid him and put the bard down. However, the wily gnome clings on to life and stays up. At this moment, Archon, another ally against Vecna, joins the fray. Vecna has expended much of his power in his current form, and yet his enemies still stand. Even further, they seem to be multiplying at every moment. Vecna continues to be assaulted with the Sword of Kos, as glowing light now emits from his wounds. Along with the attacks of the rest of Vox Machina and Archon, Vecna now appears on the back foot. Seizing the window of opportunity, Grog launches another attack, this time with the Trammel of Palor, slamming it into Vecna's form. Keyleth attempts to do the same with the Raven Queen's Trammel, but fails to find purchase, and the Trammel shatters. Vecna may have found his first break in the fight, as the back and forth continues. Pike, who currently possesses the 3rd Trammel, flies up to Grog to pass it to him, and Vecna casts Banishment to stop them. But a well-timed counterspell from Scanlan prevents the Lich God from acting yet again. The entirety of Vecna's wrath then falls on Scanlan, with first a Finger of Death, and then a polymorph that does not last long, and a banishment along with Grog, but Archon breaks his concentration. Pike successfully passes the Trammel of Iron to Grog to strike at Vecna. With Vecna attrited and Vox Machina still coming, Vecna is forced to retreat. He uses his hand to cast Teleport and Scanlan counterspells at 9th level, keeping the Lich God in place. Grog then slams the Trammel of Iron into Vecna's form.
As you take the trammel, grabbing the bottom of the rib cage, curving it underneath, you thrust it up into the core center, it seems, of his chest, where the avatar arcane energy is amassed. And as the trammel squeezes in, you hear the guttural rage from the inside of Vecna, just screaming, "You die!"
The heroes pile onto Vecna to grapple him, as Scanlan begins to read the rites of banishment. Vecna gnaws and thrashes and resists with all that he has left, but it is not enough, and Keyleth is able to finish the rites.
As you guys are there clutching him in his form, you watch as suddenly the dark clouds above begin to part. Directly above the tower, as the Titan arm is lifted up and beginning to make its way down in your direction as the shadow strengthens, the trammels from the side of the head. No. Too long.
And the hand of Vecna falls to the ground. In the aftermath, Archon picks up the hand, and in a blink, disappears as the clouds hanging over Thar and Vala and Vasselheim clear and Vecna's forces disintegrate. In the end, Vecna did achieve godhood, but appears to have gained no meaningful power from his apotheosis, now trapped on the other side of the Divine Gate. Much of Vecna's actions were hidden by the powers that be of Exandria, as not to cause fear, or worse, veneration. Any more of the Whispered One's schemes in Exandria are, as of now, unknown. If you've made it this far, thank you. Making this video was fun and quite a different challenge than previous lore videos. Instead of me digging into the dust of old books of yore, the tale of Critical Role's in video form, and still living and expanding every week. I'd also like to thank Stuart Langridge of cryogenics.org/crsearch, who made a neat little web app that has all of Critical Role's transcripts linked to timestamps. Of course, Critical Role Transcript, whose arduous work that app pulls from. It's made my research in this video so much more viable, and I couldn't even imagine how much more time this would have taken to research without it. Not that I don't take too long to make videos in the first place. So let me know what you might want covered next. Thank you again.